Elias Ward stepped into his field at sunrise and stopped cold. Dozens of deep, perfect holes scarred the earth, as if someone had worked through the night with silent, unnatural precision. He first blamed animals, until he looked closer. The dirt wasn't scattered. It was neatly stacked. The holes were evenly spaced, and his dog, Kaiser, fearless in every storm of war and life, whimpered at his side. When Elias finally discovered who had been digging, and why, a chill ran straight through him. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a thief. It was something far more haunting. Watch until the end. Comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Winter air drifted across the Montana plains, thin as a whispered warning, as Elias Ward stepped out onto his porch with the weary gait of a man who had learned to live with ghosts. Elias, now 48, carried the rugged frame of someone who had stitched up more torn flesh than he ever cared to remember. His broad shoulders were permanently slumped, as though bowed under the weight of every soldier he couldn't save. A strong, squared jaw, once clean-shaven, was now shadowed with a coarse, dark brown stubble and deep lines cut through his sun-beaten skin, lines carved not by age, but by the echo of battles fought under foreign skies. His short black hair, peppered at the temples by early gray, held the exact same stubbornness as the man himself, refusing to lie flat, refusing to surrender. Beneath the porch light, Elias scanned the frosted earth spreading out across his 20-acre property, a patch of stubborn soil resting against a vast mountain range that rose like a row of forgotten tombstones. Even after years of being home, he still moved with the quiet caution of a combat medic. Each breath measured, each step placed with discipline learned the hard way. But this morning, discipline faltered. His heart jolted once, painfully, when he saw what the night had left behind. Holes. Deep, perfectly round holes. Elias knelt beside the nearest one, lowering himself with the silent stiffness of an old injury in his right knee, shrapnel scar tissue that always flared when winter settled in. The hole was roughly 2 feet deep, its walls smooth as if carved by determined, relentless hands. Not animal, not weather, something else. He slowly extended a gloved hand, touching the disturbed rim of dirt still cold but not frozen solid, a sign it had been dug recently, just hours earlier. Behind him, Kaiser padded across the frost-silvered grass. The German shepherd was 6 years old, large and muscular, bred from a working line that favored instinct over show-ring elegance. His fur was a striking mix of sable and charcoal, darker along the spine and fading toward pale cream along the legs and chest. His amber eyes held a perceptive sharpness that made strangers think twice before approaching, yet anyone who saw him nuzzle Elias's hand would know the dog carried a loyalty carved from something deeper than obedience. Kaiser lowered his head toward the hole and let out a low, uneasy whine. Elias felt the sound like a ripple across his rib cage. "Yeah," he muttered, rubbing the dog's ears. "I don't like it either." He rose, scanning the field again. There were more this time. Yesterday there had been only one. Today he counted 3. And as he counted, the old familiar pressure crawled up the back of his throat, the creeping, choking reminder of Helmand Province 2010 when he had been forced to kneel in the sand beside men calling his name while he fought to keep their blood from spilling out faster than he could push it back in. He blinked hard. The Montana sky did not change. The holes remained. But the sand, the screams, the iron smell of fresh wounds, they rushed forward with cruel clarity. Elias exhaled slowly. "Not now," he whispered to himself. "Not today." He forced himself to walk the field, measuring the placement of each hole with the habit of someone who had once memorized distances between blast craters. He saw no tracks, no crushed grass, no sign of someone climbing the fence. Only the soil displaced in neat, disciplined piles, as if whoever dug them had respected the land even as they tore through it. And that was somehow worse. As daylight thinned into evening, Elias found himself unable to shake the weight sitting at the base of his spine. He fed Kaiser, checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and sat by the window with the silence pressing against the glass like a living thing. At midnight, the wind dropped. A quiet, so complete, settled over the land that Elias felt his own heartbeat like a drum beneath his ribs. Kaiser lifted his head, ears swiveling sharply. Then Elias heard it, faint, muffled, rising from somewhere beneath the frozen soil. A man's voice, broken, strangled, as though someone was trying to cry through a mouthful of earth. Elias went rigid. The sound tunneled straight through him, cutting into the marrow of memory. He had heard dying men make that sound before, choking on dust after a tunnel collapsed, calling out for their mothers, their sons, for God, for him, for Elias. Kaiser pressed closer to Elias's leg, trembling, not with fear but with the strange, instinctive sorrow of an animal that recognizes human suffering without understanding its shape. The cry faded, and then the field fell silent again. Elias stayed there for a long time, breathing through a tremor he could not entirely hide. When the sound returned, it came from farther away, from the direction of the barn, from the direction of the newest holes. Something, or someone, was repeating a ritual he knew too well. Someone was digging graves in the dark. And Elias Ward, for the first time in years, felt the battlefield claw its way back into his lungs. The night held its breath, and Elias knew with cold certainty that whatever was happening on his land was only the beginning. The wind crept through the pine forest with a low, restless hum, brushing against the Montana night like an old memory trying to speak. Elias Ward stood at the threshold of his back porch, boots planted in frost, muscles locked in a tension he couldn't name. Kaiser, the 6-year-old German shepherd whose instincts had never once betrayed him, stiffened at Elias's side. The dog's amber eyes fixed on the black line of trees as though they concealed a truth he'd been waiting to reveal. Then Kaiser nudged forward, gently at first, then with urgency, tugging at the cuff of Elias's work pants. Elias felt the pressure, firm, insistent, but not panicked. Kaiser wasn't warning him. Kaiser was telling him, "Follow me." Elias swallowed hard and stepped off the porch. His breath hung in the cold like an accusation as they crossed the open field, boots crunching under the thin crust of ice. The moon was a tired sliver tonight, just enough to brush the tops of the pines with pale silver. Kaiser moved ahead, confident, glancing back only to ensure Elias stayed close. When they reached the tree line, the world changed. Sounds tightened, shadows pooled thicker, and the cold smelled faintly of earth freshly torn open. Elias strained his ears. He expected silence. Instead, he heard a sound he thought he'd left overseas, dirt being moved by desperate hands. A scraping, rhythmic, broken noise. Kaiser halted behind a fallen pine trunk and lowered his body, ears pinned forward. Elias crouched beside him, peering through the branches. There, illuminated only by moonlight and the faint glimmer of frost, a man was kneeling in the soil. His thin frame was bent forward, shoulders trembling with effort. His hair, once brown, now grown long and ragged, fell over his face in tangled, sweat-darkened strands. He wore an old military field jacket 3 sizes too big, the fabric torn at the elbows, the patches rubbed to ghosts. His hands were bare, and they were bleeding. He scooped dirt with his fingers, tearing at the frozen ground until mud clung to his nails and blood streaked down his wrists. Yet he kept digging, muttering between shallow breaths. 4 more. 4 more. I left them. I left them down there. Elias's heart clenched so violently he physically rocked back a few inches. He knew that voice. Knew the cracked desperation, the breath rasping as though lungs fought ghosts instead of air. Jonas Hale. Elias hadn't said the name aloud in years, not since the report came through about a collapsed tunnel in Helmand Province during a joint operation. Jonas had been the youngest rescue specialist on rotation then, 27 years old, all sharp cheekbones, wiry muscle, and a restless energy that made him seem like he was either about to save a life or throw himself into danger, trying. Now, kneeling in the dirt, Jonas looked like a man scraped hollow by grief. His once tight features were gaunt, his jawline sharper, as though starvation and sleeplessness had carved him down to bone. A thick blond beard, patchy, unkempt, covered his jaw, and dark circles pooled under eyes that looked too wide, too empty. Elias stepped forward without thinking. A twig snapped under his boot. Jonas's head shot up. His eyes, pale blue, once full of bravado, were wild, unfocused, darting from tree to tree as though expecting an ambush. His cracked lips parted. "Cooper," he breathed, the name barely a sound. "Ramirez, are you?" He stopped mid-sentence, gaze freezing when it found Elias. Recognition flickered. Not comfort, recognition. "Ward," Jonas whispered, "but you... No, you weren't in the tunnel. How are you?" His sentence dissolved into a trembling hiss. Elias lifted both hands slowly, palms open, the same gesture he had made countless times to frighten soldiers bleeding out on battlefields. "Jonas," he said, voice steady despite the churn in his stomach. "You're safe. You're stateside. This is Montana." Jonas shook his head violently. No, the count's wrong. The map's wrong. They're still down there. I hear them, Elias." He pounded a fist against his own chest. "Down here, I hear them calling me." Kaiser stepped forward, not a threat, not a guard, but something softer. His tail held low, his ears forward. He approached Jonas with cautious, deliberate movements. Jonas flinched at first, drawing back like an animal expecting a blow, but Kaiser simply sniffed his bleeding hands and let out a gentle, grief-soaked whine. Jonas's breath caught. He stared at the dog in disbelief. You weren't in Helmand," he whispered. "Why do you sound like them?" Elias knelt slowly beside Jonas, careful to keep his voice grounded, warm. "Because he knows pain when he hears it," Elias murmured. "And so do I." Jonas's shoulders buckled. His fingers, still coated in dirt and blood, curled into trembling fists. "I didn't get them out," he choked. "The roof fell. I told them I'd dig them out. His voice shattered like frozen glass under weight. Elias had no illusions. He had seen too many men break in too many ways. But Jonas's collapse, the raw heartbreak of a man trapped in a memory too heavy to outrun, hit something deep inside Elias's chest, something he had buried under a decade of quiet farming and constant insomnia. Jonas looked past him toward the field Elias had found the holes in. "I'm making space for them," he whispered. "They deserve graves. I couldn't give them graves." Elias closed his eyes once, briefly, as if steadying himself against a blow. Then he opened them and spoke with the gentleness of someone who had once whispered to dying soldiers. "Jonas. They're not here." Jonas blinked rapidly, confusion and anguish tangling in his expression. "Then why can I hear them?" Elias did not answer, because he knew Jonas wasn't hearing ghosts beneath the soil. He was hearing the ghosts he carried in his own chest. And as Jonas's knees finally gave out and he sagged into the cold earth, Elias reached for him, catching him before he collapsed fully. Kaiser pressed close, leaning his weight against both men, grounding them in the present. For a long moment, the three of them knelt in the moonlit clearing, a medic, a broken rescue specialist, and a dog who understood sorrow better than words. The holes were no longer just holes. They were memories clawing their way out of the past, one desperate handful at a time. And as Jonas trembled in Elias's arms, Elias knew the war had followed both of them home. The sky before dawn lay heavy over the pines, a deep indigo that felt less like a color and more like a bruise across the heavens. Elias Ward guided Jonas Hale out of the clearing with slow, measured steps, mindful of every tremor running through the younger man's frame. Jonas was shivering violently, not from the cold, though the Montana air bit sharply at exposed skin, but from the shock flooding through a body that had forgotten how to be anything except hunted by memory. His breath hitched in erratic bursts, and his fingers twitched uncontrollably, still curled as if around the dirt he had been tearing up with bare hands. Kaiser walked pressed against Jonas's thigh, his thick sable fur brushing lightly against the shredded fabric of the man's pants. The dog's posture was low, deliberate, protective without being threatening. He moved like a creature who understood the fragility of the moment, not a guardian, but an anchor. Elias paused halfway across the field. Jonas leaned forward suddenly, bracing his hands on his knees. His long, tangled blonde hair fell over his face, hiding the rough patches of beard that clung to his jaw like moss growing in the cracks of a stone. Elias had known this face once, years ago, a sharp, alert, almost defiant version of it. Jonas Hale had once been the sort of soldier who outran dread through sheer stubbornness. But that version of him had died in the tunnel collapse, even if his body hadn't. Here stood the aftermath. "Easy," Elias murmured, his voice gravelly, low, the way he used to speak to soldiers who were fading fast but still fighting to stay conscious. Jonas lifted his face. His eyes, pale blue and feverish, darted across the empty field as if expecting explosions, dust, screams. "They were screaming, Ward," Jonas rasped. "Tonight. I heard them. I heard." His voice splintered. Kaiser stepped in front of him, lifting his head and placing the full weight of his muzzle against Jonas's palm. Warm, real, gentle. Jonas froze. His fingers twitched once, then slowly relaxed, curling into the soft fur like a drowning man gripping the surface. A ragged breath escaped him, a strangled, broken sob. His knees buckled. Elias caught him before he hit the ground. Jonas's face crumpled, his forehead pressing against Elias's shoulder, tears hot even in the frigid air. "I didn't save them," he choked. "I didn't save anyone." Elias held him upright with the steady strength of someone who had once steadied dying men in helicopters rattling with gunfire. "Jonas," he said quietly, "nobody could have saved everyone in that collapse. You know that." Jonas shook his head violently as if trying to shake away truth itself. "I heard them," he whispered. "You don't forget that sound." Elias's throat tightened. He did know. He knew all too well. After a few minutes, Jonas's sobs dulled to shivers. Elias guided him toward the house. The farmhouse squatted in. The half-light, its silhouette humble and weathered, white paint faded, roof patched, one porch railing slightly crooked. It was a place built by hands that believed in survival. He opened the door and led Jonas into the small mudroom. The weak bulb overhead hummed softly, illuminating the room's worn wooden bench and the hooks holding Elias's coats. Jonas stood uncertainly, like a man trespassing in someone else's fragile peace. Elias gestured to the bench. "Sit." Jonas obeyed with an exhausted slump, his long limbs folding inward protectively. The angle of light revealed more details. A scar running beneath his jawline, faint but jagged, the kind created by metal or shrapnel. Fingernails split from digging, a deep bruise blooming along his collarbone. Kaiser sat in front of him, tail sweeping the floor once in reassurance. Jonas lifted a shaking hand and let it hover over the dog as though asking permission. Kaiser leaned into the touch. Something inside Jonas gave way. Softly this time. The panic did not vanish, but it retreated, leaving behind an aching emptiness. Elias left briefly and returned with a blanket, old, woolen, frayed at the edges. He draped it over Jonas's shoulders, noting the way the younger man flinched first from instinct, then relaxed as warmth settled in. "Why didn't you call the sheriff?" Jonas whispered, voice hoarse like gravel dragged across stone. Elias looked at him, truly looked. The hollow cheeks, the shame swimming behind his eyes, the way he held himself small, like someone expecting punishment. "Because," Elias answered slowly, "I've seen men drowning in things nobody else can see, and you don't arrest drowning men, you pull them out." Jonas blinked hard, his jaw trembled. "I don't deserve—" "Stop." Elias's tone was firm but not unkind. "Tonight isn't about what you think you deserve. It's about what's real, and what's real is you need help." Jonas's eyes glistened again, but the tears didn't fall. He looked down at Kaiser, who had now curled against his boots, body solid and steady. Jonas let out a whisper of disbelief. "That dog saved me." Elias nodded. "He does that." Jonas leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking terror. His breathing slowed, eyelids heavy. Elias stayed nearby until Jonas drifted into a restless, fragile sleep. Kaiser remained curled beside him like a silent sentinel. Outside, the wind moved through the grass with a quiet sigh. The holes in the field were still waiting. So were the memories. But for the first time, neither man faced them alone. The late summer sun rose soft and gold over the Montana Valley, casting a warm shimmer across the farmhouse roof and turning the morning mist into threads of pale silver. Elias Ward stepped out onto the porch with Kaiser trotting at his heel, the German shepherd's thick coat glowing faintly under the early light. The dog paused at the edge of the steps, ears forward, tail giving one determined sweep as if announcing the start of a new day, one that no longer carried the weight of a man digging toward ghosts. Jonas Hale was already awake. He stood by the fence line, shoulders hunched slightly beneath a clean gray shirt Elias had lent him. The shirt fit loosely on his lean frame, revealing just how much weight war and wandering had stripped from him. His blond hair, once tangled and wild, had been trimmed that morning by Elias with a pair of old shears. The new cut revealed a strong, weathered jaw and a faint scar arcing beneath his left ear, a scar Jonas rarely acknowledged but often touched unconsciously, the way one touches a memory that still burns. The bruise on his collarbone had faded to a dull yellow. His hands, though still bandaged in places, were steadier now, curled around a hammer instead of shaking from visions of a collapsed tunnel. It was the first morning Elias had seen him working without hesitation. Jonas lifted a new fence plank, braced it, and drove a nail through with careful, deliberate force. No frantic movements, no restless scanning of the ground. Just work, balanced, focused, present. Elias approached him quietly. "Fence is looking solid," he said. Jonas nodded, his eyes still fixed on the wood grain. "It feels good," he murmured, voice softer than the morning breeze, "to build something again." His tone held both the fragility and resilience of a man rediscovering his place in a world he once believed had no room for him. Kaiser patted closer and nudged Jonas's knee with his nose. Jonas let out a faint smile, small, uneven, but genuine, as he reached down to scratch behind the dog's ear. Kaiser closed his eyes in approval. The transformation had begun the moment Jonas first touched the dog in the field. And now, day by day, it continued, not as a miracle, but as a slow reclaiming of breath and life. Throughout the days that followed, Elias eased Jonas into a rhythm. They repaired the sagging barn door, its hinges rusted from years of neglect. They cleared the irrigation ditch, the cold stream running over their boots. They scrubbed the chicken coop, Jonas ducking his tall frame under the low rafters with a muttered curse that made Elias chuckle. The work was ordinary, almost painfully mundane, and that was precisely why it healed. Jonas found himself grounding the shaking in his hands by gripping tools instead of dirt, found that silence on the farm did not echo with screams when Kaiser walked beside him, found that Elias, steady, patient, scarred in quieter ways, understood without needing explanation. One afternoon, while sorting wooden stakes beside the field, Jonas stopped abruptly. His eyes were fixed on a patch of disturbed soil, the remnants of the holes he had once dug in madness. Elias approached slowly, prepared to intervene, but Jonas simply crouched and touched the earth, fingertips brushing the top layer with a gentleness far removed from the frantic clawing of nights past. "They were supposed to be graves," Jonas whispered, "but they don't have to stay that way." Elias watched him carefully. "What do you want them to be?" Jonas inhaled deeply, then exhaled with a trembling resolve. Something living. And that was how the lavender began. Elias drove them into town to a small nursery run by a wiry woman with kind eyes named Maribel Cortez. She had strong forearms from years of hauling soil bags and a voice that rasped pleasantly, shaped by a lifetime of desert wind. When Jonas approached her stall, Maribel eyed him with a reading gaze. Not judging, just noticing the way he stood slightly off-center, as if bracing for an unseen threat. "You planting for beauty or planting for healing?" she asked. Jonas hesitated. Elias answered for him. "Both." Maribel grinned and handed Jonas a tray of lavender starters, their green sprigs delicate, fragrant, and full of stubborn life. "Lavender always knows how to come back," she said. Jonas held the tray as if holding something sacred. Back on the farm, the planting began. Elias dug the first square of soil beside the old holes, then handed the trowel to Jonas. Jonas planted the second. Kaiser laid down beside them in the grass, his tail thumping gently with each new sprout. For days they worked in the sun, tilling, planting, watering. The scent of lavender slowly overtook the field, the purple blossoms rising where once only empty pits had marked Jonas's pain. And with each plant Jonas set into the earth, something inside him rooted a little deeper too. By late summer, the field had changed. So had the men. That evening, as the sun melted behind the barn, Elias, Jonas, and Kaiser sat on the porch steps. Before them stretched rows of lavender, glowing violet in the last light, swaying gently like a living memory. Elias took a quiet breath. "You didn't leave anyone behind, Jonas," he said, voice warm with truth. "You carried them back." Jonas swallowed hard. His hands, resting on his knees, no longer trembled. "They're not ghosts anymore," he whispered, "just memories." Kaiser leaned his head against both men's legs, sealing the moment. The field was no longer a battleground. It was a place reborn, and so were they. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive in lightning or angels. Sometimes they come quietly, through a loyal dog who steadies a broken man's hands, through a friend who refuses to walk away, through a field that once held fear but rises again in lavender and light. Elias and Jonas learned that God doesn't always remove the scars. He simply teaches us that they can bloom into something new. And maybe that same grace is working in your life right now, even if you can't see it yet. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, healing, and the quiet ways God still moves through this world. May He bless you and protect you, always.